everybody. So my show is called Turmoil, and turmoil is when you are experiencing a disorder. And so what my show focuses on is someone who is navigating through their symptoms of having a persistent depressive disorder. And so this disorder affects how I see myself and how I see my environment. And so this show starts off with my first piece, Trapped. I made it 2 years ago. And this was during like the beginning phases of COVID. And so during that time, since we were at home and I was like by myself a lot, I started to think more of like my headspace, like what I was really going through during this time. And so I felt really like trapped in, and making this piece, I realized that throughout the art making process, as I was using my hands a lot, it felt very like therapeutic, because since I was able to repetitively like wrap the wire around the cage and create a cage, it kind of distracted me, and so I was able to like calm down. And so later on, I was assigned to do like a 30-day project where every day you create a certain like one piece every day for 30 days. And so I decided to keep that tactile element and approach it that way. And so I decided that every day for 30 days I would create a collage, which the collages are on the front wall. I would create a collage focusing on a different symptom that I'm experiencing every single day. So there are some that focus on being paranoid, feeling anxious, overwhelmed, feeling like you're trapped, or like starvation, just different symptoms I was going through. And so that was in a month. But these symptoms could happen like in a day, or in a week, or an entire year. Like it's all a part of the wave that I go through. And so from those collages, I started thinking of ideas for my Plan A project. And I was like, well, I really like 3 specific collages based on their textures. And so I decided that what if I grab those textures and I create like a box and have that box become the environment that I'm in. And so this is where my boxes come in, where, as you notice, each box has the same subject, same position, but the box around it has different textures. And I wanted to kind of show how a meltdown could feel, because all of these symptoms would happen to me when I would lay in bed and I was by myself. And so it's just different ways of feeling like a meltdown, because every time you go through one, it feels different. It's never the same. So one time you might feel like really heavy, or one you might feel like non-existent. It's all just different every time. So from there, I was like, well, what if I start expanding a little bit more? And I start focusing on like the head itself. So then that's when these pieces focusing on the head come in. Because I also wanted to show like how I would feel when I would lay down and kind of go through everything and just lay there. And so I really wanted each head to focus on a material that would express what the experience they're going through. So for example, the cement one that is laying down. For that one, I chose cement because I wanted to represent the feeling of feeling you're heavy, you're stuck, you can't move, it's cold. And then for the potpourri piece, that's when you have so many thoughts, you just feel so consumed. And then for wax, same thing, you feel consumed, but it's like you're suffocating. Like you're just like enveloped in all these thoughts. The paper one, I wanted it to, like when you feel like light, non-existent, like you're floating. This piece, I wanted it to represent someone who feels shattered, they feel broken, like they're just, falling apart. And then there's one in the corner with all the wires. I wanted wanted it to represent just the thoughts, kind of just like you're actually looking at the process of someone just being wrapped around in their own thoughts repeatedly. And so the purpose of this exhibition is kind of like a diary, just navigating through my symptoms and just expressing it with like a tactile approach just to cope. Since I noticed that being really physical, it comes in like if you're cleaning or you're doing something with your hands, it's just really like relaxing. So for me, being able to create something three-dimensional kind of releases it and it brings me like back down. So. Any questions?
What would you say your favorite piece is?
My favorite piece, it would have to be the box with the crumpled paper. That box took me a whole month to make because when I was crumpling each paper, so I made it out of construction paper, so each page was just like this much. And I realized I tended to do it more when I felt anxious, so I was kind of putting my energy into each one, and so like doing it repetitively like calmed me down. And then when I didn't really feel that way, I would just stop. And so I feel more like emotionally connected to that one because so much energy went into it. Sorry.
I was going to ask if you consider this to be, I'm going to say this to be therapy. Do you consider this as a process of art therapy? And if so, how does that translate to a professional gallery space?
Could you repeat the last part?
Do you consider the work and the process art therapy? And if so, how does that translate to a gallery space and how you want your viewers to approach and read the work?
So how I set the work, kind of just how I started this whole like getting into the headspace. For art therapy, I never really took it, if that makes sense, so I wouldn't know like how, it was mostly by myself. That's what I'm usually used to, that when it comes to coping, I usually tend to do that myself. I don't seek like professional help. I always just figure out ways to make myself feel better. And so here how I format is just a sequence of like, I start here and I start realizing like I really like focusing on my headspace. How do I expand on it? And then that's when I want the viewer to like kind of go around to the collages and the box and then kind of just add with the ads.
So you have this intentional flow through the gallery to navigate your process.
It wasn't even intentional at all, no. I was setting the gallery. Yeah, like at first it was just like, oh, well, I wanted the collages to be in the front to catch attention. Like, oh, what is that little square? Let me look closer.
Yes.
And then as they're walking, then they see the boxes and they see the head. So it wasn't really until like Tim brought it up, like, oh, this is the same sequence you took making each piece. So
Yeah, I love the tactile exploration of materials and how it translates to different points in headspace. You've done an excellent job. Is there any material that you like tinkered with in the past that you did not find to alleviate some of the turmoil? Like, so like any like type of media or like material that was more stressful to work with than helpful?
I think it would be the paper. The paper was really hard. It was like I've paper mache before, but this was a different type of paper, and so doing it, I was really scared because I didn't think it would actually like, come out. But I think the most therapeutic was just ripping it, but actually putting it together, it wasn't. It was really, yeah.
So, how do you pick out your material that you use? I know you talked about one of them, you used cement because you wanted it to feel heavy, but for other ones, like these collages or even the paper one, like how did you come to the realization you wanted to
familiar to me. Like you'll find like air dry clay, like just things that could like are easily accessible and that's in my environment. So it's either I find stuff at home or I go outside and actually like start picking out material.
I was just going to say, it's interesting because we were in here before for your critique, you know, and with not as many people. It's so interesting how activated the space is with all of the, everyone kind of in it. But when no one is here, it feels like such a meditative space. And it's so quiet and it feels like it transforms the space just with the placement of your work. Even though you have a lot of work, because there's not much on the exterior spaces, it feels very minimalist and like kind of makes me want to, you know, kind of go inside of my own headspace. So I think that the way that you arrange the work really helps to kind of push forward those ideas that we were talking about and where it's coming from. So I wanted to mention that for two reasons. One, because it's interesting how it's transformed, but I would also say like everyone should come back like while it's up to spend some time like when it's not as full as well, because it's a different kind of experience.
It is, and when setting it up, I really wanted to be very immersive. So like with the pedestals, I didn't really want them against the wall. I kind of wanted them more out, so people could like walk around and really become up close and personal. Because while looking at it, I do want people to really like start to reflect on their own. Because I've had some people come in here and they're like, oh my God, that's me. Like I can relate to this, and it's like I really like that kind of like reaction. So that's why I was aiming for setting everything up.
I have a question. My question is really for the people looking at the show. You've heard Daria talk about the show. I'm kind of curious if any of you came to this without knowing that and sort of came with it and read the show in a certain way. Like, did you read it in a way that was personal, or I'm just curious.
I would say it's more personal for me because I've known Daria for multiple years now, and just having like, I miss those like deep conversations together, and then when I look at her art, I'm like, this is what I truly miss, because the connection that I have with Daria and what I have with this art, it resonates to how I could and should reflect on myself more. So.
Well, what's behind my question is, if I walked in this gallery and didn't read your statement, I would interpret this work quite differently, not oppositionally. The work feels to me really, it's really powerful work. And it's powerful knowing what your statement is, but the work in itself, without the explanation, is also really powerful. So that's why I'm asking the question of people, when they looked at it, somehow they interpreted it or thought about it very personally. That's a question.
Well, and I think that's what I was saying a little bit about being in this space, you know, by myself, is that seeing the like human kind of face, it makes me think about sort of humanity or myself, and then like what are those materials kind of representing, especially the piece in the corner, kind of seeing that like it's about to slide off. It kind of gives me a little bit of anxiety, but then makes me start to think about kind of the fragility of like human life, and you know, so there's just like all of these other things that just, it's almost like a little snapshot where I'm like supposed to really focus in on each of those individual pieces, but it does become something that I sort of relate to my own experiences. Reading the statement makes it a little deeper, but it, you know, it does work really well, like as like stands alone on its own.
Maya and I were talking about this earlier about just what materials can do to us, mostly in terms of like our biological responses. Like my son and I saw some roadkill on the way to school today, and he said, "Why does seeing something gross make you feel gross?" And I was like, "That's a really interesting question." Like, right? So let's talk about like this, how our brains work, and like what we. Some of it is linked to our survival, and some of it is linked to this amazing like tool of sympathy, and you know, like it's what brings the world into our bodies and what brings our bodies out into the world, you know. And so like seeing these are sort of having a similar effect, right? Like you see metal and you think a thing, right? Like you grow up in an environment long enough to have some pretty hardwired associations with materials. But then there's also hardwired associations with the body, obviously. Like you can't decapitate a head and present it and not elicit a very visceral response, right? And each material is doing something totally different, but then the faces themselves are totally, they're not individuals, right? They're like mannequin heads, you know, and they're a stand-in for everybody, right? Or something. So I love how it's sort of, I mean, a painting show on the wall would also be facing inward, right? Towards the gallery. But this is facing inward in a really different way. Like it's surrounding in a different way, you know, and it's sort of, like you said, your body is not only responding to the individual pieces, but the way that you installed it, your body is also, has to respond, you know, so it's great.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.